Alright.
You are the one.
Let's do a nice little countdown. And 1, 2, 3. Hello, Phumzile.
Hi.
Welcome to the Octagality podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice welcome.
That's great. Thank you for coming on today. It's very nice to have you. I've been trying to get you on here for so long.
I know.
And life just keeps happening, bro. Just keeps happening.
Dude, I've been so busy.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I need to hit you up and say that I'm ready now. I'm sorry for making you wait so.
No, you don't need to apologize. It's okay. It's okay. It happens. Like, I'm just chilling here waiting for people to come to me. You know, like, I'm the Buddha here. I'm just waiting. People come in whenever they're ready. So it's all good, man. How have you been?
I've been good.
Mm-hmm.
I've been good. School is like slow paced this year, so that helps.
Mm.
So I'm just like kind of taking my time while I finish up like my masters.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think in terms of like my mental space, like state, I'm in a better place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As opposed to like when lockdown started?
As opposed to last year when I was doing like my practicals and stuff.
Yeah.
That was a difficult year. Yeah, my second year of masters. That was a difficult year. It was very demanding, and we also had to navigate like through COVID. You know, so making it work, getting the coursework completed, making sure that we still see clients, and you know, just having to adapt to the new normal. So it was very demanding, very fast paced, one thing after the other. So
it definitely does sound demanding.
Yeah.
You're doing psychology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're doing that in your practicals. You're seeing actual human beings.
Yeah. yeah. Under supervision, though.
Under supervision as well.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So I think it's also demanding the respect. Like, if you're still seeing people, and then you gotta take. Do you take that baggage home with you?
I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just speak for myself.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can't. Like, I think, but I think like let me say, especially when you start, it's not easy to not take that with you, because you know clients are people that you've come to know. You learn about their circumstances, and it's just human of you to kind of feel what they're going through. Yeah, so I know, like, I've had experiences where it's like I couldn't stop thinking about a particular client and what they're going through, but you try to like separate yourself from that, because you know, someone once advised me that try not to carry, you know, that with you when you go home, but it's not always easy. I don't think it is all for me, but I'm learning.
I guess you're on that learning curve. Because I remember I also had. I don't think it's anything as intense as yours, but because I did legal clinic in final year. I was still at Tux. And you see clients and like oh my gosh, it's so sad and like painful to hear like the legal difficulties people like are dealing with, like maybe like especially when it's things like divorce, because like this divorce is where it can be a little bit funny, where like they get very petty. Some of the couples get very petty. It's like, oh, he keeps calling me saying he wants to see his kids. That kind of a thing. Yeah. But like I said, guys, you guys have an arrangement for this. Stop calling us and involving us in every single little thing. Or we're gonna cut you off. And then there's also instances where it's like very serious. Like maybe the husband has left the family home, or like he's still creeping on her. But like the marriage is like kind of broken down, and then like she comes in there. And like the wife or the husband, whoever it is, the client comes in there and they talk to you about it, and they just break down in front of you, and you just have to keep it together because you can't hold back your tears when somebody's was crying in front of you. You also want to be like, I empathize with you, but like unfortunately you're there to try to help them, so you need to like kind of almost like keep some kind of like serious like blank, not too blank face, but like you just try to to be professional in that way. Just to show them that you are invested and you're gonna help them. You need to have like a business face on.
Definitely. That's also something I would struggle with, because I'm just like, you kind of like hear people's circumstances and you wanna go like,
That's real.
Oh my goodness, why? But you can't, you know, because I think the way you react also makes the situation like worse. Especially if you're going to be like, oh my goodness, that's, you know, but you're also trying to find that balance of like, I hear you and I understand why this is so difficult for you, you know. So yeah, finding that balance is not easy.
No,
like working with people.
It is. I can't imagine it is.
No.
So what happens when like once a client is done, like when they leave? Like I mean, do you have to like you said you were seeing clients last year, right?
Yeah, it was last
So
year.
would you have to like file out a report at the end of the day about what you guys spoke about, or what would happen?
Do you mean like after the whole process?
Like say on a day-to-day basis, like if you're seeing clients on a daily basis. Or like rather tell me do you have any reports that you have to submit, or does it only come at the end of the like I don't want to say project because it sounds weird, but when you're done dealing with the client, only at the end, and like it's like your last consultation or your last visit, that's when you finally report.
Yeah, so we would have usually reports at the end of the process. Mind you, my experience also is a bit different because we're under supervision. So there are processes that exist there in the institution that won't necessarily exist if you had your own practice. But what is similar is that we do have reports. So you would see your clients, you assess them, you start gathering. So usually you see clients first. With my specialization, it's usually children. So the parents bringing their children, then you get to meet them and they tell you what the problem is, why they're here and whatever, and then you start gathering like data on that, and then based on what you've got and why they brought the child, then you do the whole assessment, and then once you've done the assessment, you then write a report to say this is what I found, this is how I understand the situation, and this is what I recommend would be the way forward. And then only then, after the parents have read the report, they understand it, or the relevant people in the child's life, maybe school teachers or because you find teachers also want the reports, but at the consent of like the parents, school teachers or whatever, a social worker. Once they have the report, they've read it, they understand it, and parents are comfortable with the way forward, then you go into therapy or what you've recommended they should have in the report. So that's how it usually goes.
Oh wow. It sounds like quite a process, man.
Yeah, it is. It's not an easy one because, I mean, what you have in the report is what you've observed, and you just need to make sure that what you observe is, or the conclusions also you've made, you try your best to make sure that they're accurate. You know, so that process is quite long. You can't just look at it and be like, oh, they're inattentive, it's ADHD, you know, of course it is, you know, so it's a long process.
Yeah, I think we have I don't know if it's like a crisis, but like there was a point in time where the go-to phrase for kids behaving badly was ADHD in South Africa. Like I remember being in primary school and then like maybe like, no, this kid has ADHD, ADHD, and then they'd always like prescribe Ritalin for those kids. And then it just stopped. They got to varsity as well. People were studying and like they still took Ritalin and certain drugs like that. Do you like? I guess when you have a kid, right, and then you've had that interview process with them, and then like with the parents and the teacher, whoever is involved with them, immediately is there any opportunity for them to be like prescribed anything, or do you have to wait a while? Continue observing them, or how does it work? How does the process work for like giving like prescriptions?
I mean, firstly, like you'd have to, so what they always encourage with us is that you have to have multiple sources of information. Even if you're diagnosing whatever inattentive behavior or hyperactive behavior you observe, should be something you see in a multiple environments or multiple settings. So you would have to have seen that, okay, no, this person is behaving this way at school, they're doing this while they're with me while I'm assessing them, they're doing this at home as well. And you would have had to rule out anything else that could be causing that particular behavior. So we don't necessarily run to the medication, because a child can be hyperactive in class or inattentive, but it could be yes that they have ADHD, or that the content doesn't make sense to them, and that's why they're just inattentive and choose to focus on everything else, because they believe that I'm not going to understand what's happening in class in any case. You get what I mean? Or it could be something else completely. The teaching style's not working for them. So they kind of lose interest, you know. So you would have to be sure that you've ruled everything out that could be an explanation for the behavior, and then we can move to, okay, they have ADHD, they'll then need medication, yes. But in most instances, they usually do need it. Yeah.
Shame, man. So, like, is there something that you've picked up across the country with, like, the kids? Maybe, like, there's been study or popular, like, statistics that, like, indicate, like, a lot of kids in South Africa are suffering from anything in particular?
I would be lying because I'll be lying if I say I do know. I don't know. If I'm quite honest, because of how the training only exposes you to a certain amount of clients. So at this stage, I don't think I would say I know what the vast majority of children seem to be, you know, experiencing. It really depends. It really depends. Like, if you're dealing with kids from a home, a majority of them might be like emotional, behavioral difficulties. So it just depends on the population that you're getting. But I think if I do maybe something like my internship and a bit further, then I can say this is what I'm observing. Yeah.
So what have you, like, mostly noticed in the ones that you've dealt with?
The ones that I've been exposed to was definitely behavioral, emotional challenges. As a result of home circumstances, and just as a result, so you'll find that the child is presented as if they have emotional, behavioral problems, but you realize that in addition to that, there's other challenges as well that are not necessarily noticed. And that you find that there are school difficulties that are also learning difficulties that are also adding to the behavioral issues because, you know, maybe frustration or whatever. But yeah, that's what I've noticed thus far with what I've been exposed. It could be different.
So, like, what kind of issue, like, with a kid? Like, I mean, typically, well, is there any issue that you noticed that was, like, very, like, peculiar? Like, when you came to school, outside of the classroom, inside of the classroom?
No, not anything, like, you mean anything common across
or
all cases?
just in any case that maybe, like, piqued your interest. They're like, oh, okay, wow, what's that about? You know?
No.
Okay.
No, maybe it's an exposure thing.
Yeah.
But at what I would see is typically what you would expect. Oh, the child is not listening to teachers. He or she's talking back. What you'd also typically expect, like, from teenagers as well, being resistant and, you know. So there was nothing that I've seen thus far that was like, you know, I've never seen something like that before. That's quite interesting. No. And sometimes I think the circumstances make you understand why they behave that way. It's just the only interesting thing for me was how, you know, because parents, whoever adult role player is in the child's life, they bring the child and they make salient, like, what they think the problem is. And then you kind of, then you deal with the child and then you realize, no man, there's actually something else. So that was for me the interesting part of, there's actually something else here. We'll be doing things related to emotional stuff, but you can see that there's also challenges related to school. Yeah.
Jeez. So I imagine, like, if you're dealing with one kid who has, like, that many challenges, you're going to have to, like, have a holistic approach to dealing with that, or helping them solve those problems with those, like, different role players in that instance. So I imagine, like, you'd have something for the teacher to do.
Yes.
You'd have something for the parent to do.
Yes.
And then what if it's a bullying problem? Then do you have to get involved with that other kid as well? Do you have to, like, start talking to them? Or maybe you might make a recommendation for them to start seeing someone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most that because I haven't had cases like that, but I'm just trying to think how I would potentially deal with something like that. I think at that point it would be involving using maybe, for example, a teacher's authority or a parent's ability to intervene to solve that case, then me maybe directly approaching that kid. Because remember, I can't just, that sounds bad, but I can't call a child in who wasn't referred to me. The parents have to agree to that. I can't do that. And I would potentially be exposing that child that they're seeing me if I now go to the school and say there's a kid I want to see as a result of this client of mine saying that they're being bullied. I'm exposing that child. Who's that child who's saying that? Who told you? Who are you? I mean, it's like, oh no. Okay, so the child is coming to see you, so you're potentially exposing them to that. But what I would do maybe involve maybe parents, like go to the school, have a resolution situation over there, involve the teacher. Are you aware that this is happening in class? How can she or he mediate what's happening, put the child at the back, do this, separate them or whatever. So I would use those adult role players in there as opposed to maybe directly.
Because I'm thinking, like, I've had this thought for the longest time that, like, I mean, not even, like, just being limited to, like, what's the word now? For children, I don't know if, like, psychology is the right word, but, like, if you have I guess psychiatrist or psychologist, like, they train to be what? Is there a difference between those two?
Yeah, there's a difference.
Okay,
so a psychiatrist, usually medical degree. So they do medicine and then specialize in psychological disorders. And what they do is their method of treatment is medication. Psychologist is where we move into the like BA degrees in terms of the degree humanities. But as you specialize, like with EdPsych, I've moved from humanities to education. With there, what we do is psychotherapy, so that would be the talking and so we don't necessarily prescribe medication, we refer to a psychiatrist. That's the difference.
So as a psychologist then, what I thought would be great, do you think it's a good idea to have like more psychologists in schools and like at police stations and spaces like that where there's a lot of trauma for victims? Because I've always like, I'm reading a lot that there's a lot of insensitivity, especially in cases of like sexual assault or violence or domestic abuse, and then somebody arrives at the police station and then they're not being treated well, they're not taking the case properly. Do you think it would be better if you had like maybe a psychologist officer that would just be there and be present for those cases, so like when somebody's speaking they can talk to the victim as well?
Yeah, I think that could work. Like you say, it's the sensitivity around it. Trauma counselors as well, because I think when you're not fully knowledgeable about certain things, like even with cops, they're not knowledgeable about how to respond to certain things because they don't have the background of what is the impact of what they're saying or whatever the case may be. There's no awareness of that, and people who do maybe psychology are aware of that. I think then it'd be greatly beneficial for psychologists to be there. Whether there should be psychs at schools,
yeah, because
I feel I feel very strongly about how that would be of great benefit. I think ideally, in my mind, like as a student in psychology at the moment, and not a qualified psychologist, like just the idea of having one psychologist at every school would be so ideal.
Because they have that in America.
Yes.
Granted, I only see a lot of it in movies. I haven't done any research or any reading on it, but I think it does help in some cases. It could help in some cases, especially if now that more people are becoming aware of the impact that mental health has on the human condition and on different people. Having somebody that you can just talk to that is fully available, fully accessible at any given moment in time, I think that would make a lot of a difference in a lot of people's lives. Because it's just we're facing a lot of problems of lacking access to certain resources and certain people that can help with certain things.
definitely. I think it could work. It's just that, psychology, like access to mental health services, it's just a different story.
Yeah.
But at the same time, for someone who's studying psychology, I can understand why the services would be so expensive. But from the person who's giving the services.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's for me personally, the career is quite demanding. And the years you'd have to study for it is also like, steep. So, I just wish though that, I think ideally would be great if we had, like, how we have public hospitals and stuff.
Yeah.
We have institutions that solely focus on mental health.
That
would be accessible to everybody. Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, like, if they are subsidized, like in South Africa. I don't know anything about this. I'm just going to check that right now because I think it would be a great idea if there was like public spaces or like public institutions, just like a hospital.
Exactly. Exactly. Just for.
Or like even a clinic.
Yes, for mental health services.
Because I think most of those that are in South Africa are run by NGOs, and then they probably do receive like a stipend or a donation from government, but there aren't any that are run by government itself.
Exactly.
It's crazy, man.
That's crazy, hey?
Like after all these years, you'd think they would know better.
But I mean, I think the awareness about mental health issues, for me at least, gives me a bit of hope. Just being aware of the implication of, neglecting our mental health. What can that do for us? How does it affect us? So I think that's a good start. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. So, South African College of Applied Psychology. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so the question is like, what it's like being a psychologist in South Africa. In a violent country like South Africa, the dire shortage of psychologists in the public sector is a cause for major concern. South Africans are highly stressed, and so there's a need for the qualified expertise that psychology can provide. So says Professor Tholine Sodi, President-elect of the Psychological Society of South Africa, who recently told the New Age newspaper that most practitioners in the country have turned to private practice. Indeed, according to Health Systems Trust, the number of clinical psychologists in the South African public sector is just 2.75 per 100,000 people. That is crazy, dude. And I mean, like, who do you turn to when you're going through it as a psychologist? Like, do you have your own like psychologist as well?
Yeah. In my training, they encouraged it. Like when we were still doing the practicals, we were encouraged like, go see somebody yourself. Go to a psychologist that you can trust and whatever. And you can speak to them about some of the things.
And you gotta pay them as well.
Yes.
Damn, bro. All right.
In the same way that when you are qualified, you do need a psychologist. Is it for supervision? I guess you'd say supervision. A psychologist to also like give you some sort of direction in cases that you are experiencing, that you're currently dealing with. Because I could be qualified and I'm there's a difficult case, I don't know how to approach it or whatever the case. Or it's so new to me that I'm just trying to find my feet, and then you have another psychologist that you can consult and say, please give me direction in terms of how we can do this. So it's something it's very encouraged in your training, even when you're qualified. Yeah.
Because for some reason, I think, I don't know who else, but I don't want to generalize, but I've got this idea that like psychologists come out of like varsity all knowing and they're enlightened. And they're like, come, tell me your troubles, little ones. And you're sitting there in the therapist chair, the psychologist chair, and you just tell them all your issues. But like, yeah, I guess that sounds realistic. It sounds like a reality that there are going to be some cases that are like very severely difficult, and you might need guidance.
Exactly. Yeah. Someone who, because you'll get psychologists who expertise in certain or specialize in certain areas of it, and they can tell you what they've done, if they've seen such cases. Maybe they have a lot of experience with such cases, and they can give you direction. And we also need guidance, and it doesn't mean that.
So who do they turn to?
I guess they have their own people.
It's a vicious cycle, man. That's like that. And this is a question like probably a lot of people always have because like, that's why I'm asking him. Like now you know the inside scoop.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Like, who else knows?
I'm sure they have their own people as well that they look to. I don't know how long people actually have how they stay under like how qualified psychologists like still have supervisors, how many years they do that, but I think it's something I would do for like a lifetime, even once I'm qualified, because just to get somebody else a different opinion, because also you can see a child and you have this blind spot, you view them in a particular lens, and somebody else can give you input and see a whole different story, and it can help you see what you're not exploring, which is great because we don't want to end up misdiagnosing kids because it has a ripple effect for how we choose to help them in the future, a ripple effect on how they feel about themselves. So it's so important to not be in a position where now you're misdiagnosing, and it's easy to think something is the case because you're so set to prove that that's the case.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So it's very easy to be like, this child can't be anything else. It's ADHD. They're doing this, they're doing that. They're taking off this, they're taking off that. So in our training, they've also encouraged that look for explanations why you would be wrong. And then you're sure that you're ruling out everything. Yeah. Is there another explanation for this behavior? Is there another explanation for him acting out or her acting out as a child doing this and that? And I think that helps a great deal to get you out of that blind spot.
Yeah, deduction is a great way to go about it, I guess, in that instance, because children don't have a lot of protection in those kind of instances.
Exactly.
But you've never dealt with any adults, right?
I haven't dealt with any adults. It was actually a conversation that we had in one of my classes, my first year of masters. And, one of the lecturers were like, you guys, we do need to realize that we can work with adults, right? Because the specialization speaks of young people and children. But, it's something, but we specialize in learning and development, and people are continuously developing. So I personally don't see why I wouldn't work with adults and, across the lifespan. So I think what we could do most likely with adults, if they come specifically to you and not in relation to a child, maybe career-related stuff. Maybe you want to switch careers and you're not into law anymore, and you're like 35 and you're like, you know what, maybe now I want to be this and that. Career guidance, stuff like that.
Oh, so you guys can also do career guidance as well?
Yes.
Wow.
We can do career guidance.
Okay, that's pretty interesting.
I think educational psychology, it's an interesting field. I just think that it's not a field sometimes that's particularly fully valued because with me, when I started, I used to think, no, ed psychs, we work with children who have learning disorders, So I expect to see a child it's either they have a specific learning disorder or they have, I expect intellectual disability, or, I limited myself in that way. Till being exposed to the field, you realize, but we're working with development, working with kids. And that starts from the moment, a mother's pregnant. So we can even intervene with prenatal care. We can work with moms. We can work with, all these other people that are involved in that process. We can work in nutrition, all those areas. So you kind of, when I started, I also limited myself, then realizing that there's so much we do in the field. But yes, career guidance.
Automatically, I just assumed that it goes strictly just like for kids because it's like development and education. It sounds like it's something that like be specialized for little kids, but like it's quite broad in the end.
It is quite broad, exactly.
And how much time do you think you'd have to give yourself to fully understand that like this is exactly what you want to work with, or like these are the people you want to work with?
I think, okay, sorry.
Because you do have a passion for children, right?
I do. I think children, and particularly just their development. Yeah. In terms of how much time, I don't know. Maybe you'd need a few years. I think I think ideally how I would want to start now. Practicals give me an indication of what it is that I'd like to focus on, but obviously with more experience in my internship going forward, I'll be exposed to different settings and populations of children and whatever. But I already have an idea. I don't know if that's going to change, but I already have an idea that I'm very big on just like classroom related difficulties. Yeah, I'm more drawn to that. Your specific learning, your ADHD, anything that obviously these disorders affect all aspects of the child's life, family life, and whatever. But for me, I think what I'm most interested in is what happens in the classroom, how it affects the child in the classroom. How do we make them cope in the education system? How do we get teachers to be supported to make accommodations for such children? How do we do that in a context where it's not easy for teachers to always do that because they have like 60 learners in some rural areas, 60 learners, How do we support teachers to manage such things? So that's for me, like...
That's very holistic.
Yeah, that's what I'm more drawn to. Yeah, but you essentially deal with everything.
Yeah. And then if you're in that kind of a situation where you're working with a teacher that's overburdened, it's clearly overburdened, who would you be making those recommendations to? Like maybe to the teacher? I imagine there are some conversations you guys will have, but like, is there any senior authority that you would have to be speaking to that can effect those changes?
So with my experience, what I've seen is we make recommendations directly to like the school, so that would be directly to the teachers, parents. If the child is in a home, like house mothers and stuff like that. So it wouldn't. There's no necessarily. We target people that are in the child's immediate environment, the people that interact with the child. Like you say, if let's say identify that a child has a learning difficulty, but the school that they're in is not going to be able to accommodate this difficulty because the teacher's overburdened already, then obviously we start looking at what are other viable options that we can use. If this child has such a severe learning difficulty, can I then refer them to a particular special school that they can go to where they, I'm sure that they specialize in this and the teachers are trained to do this and they can cope? And is it within the financial means of the parents of this child? Can they afford it? Is it feasible? Yeah. So you have to make these recommendations, understanding the context of the family. You can't be like, oh, your child is struggling with this, take them to a special school where they pay like 5K a month and the parents are telling you that they're from this background and they're not employed. You have to find solutions that are in line with what, So it's not always easy because there's some things that you can't necessarily solve.
Yeah.
But you at least do your best to recommend with that in mind. Yeah. So essentially always the people that are in the child's immediate, because those day-to-day are understanding that those day-to-day interactions are the most impactful. Yeah.
They can make the most difference in the child's life, I guess.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot. That's
That
actually a lot, dude. It makes you wonder if you actually want to have kids now.
Seeing what kids get exposed to and what happens, it really makes you, I think for me it's made me extra sensitive to children and understanding how certain experiences affect their development and how they come to understand things, how they come to do things. But what I love also about development is that because it's happening, it can change. Based on what you do when you find that particular problem. I think that's what I also love about kids, that they could have circumstances, situations that can turn around. Yeah. There's so much you can do if you identify a problem, early detection, like 8-7 years, and you see that this child has this behavioral challenge, and how can we change what's in the environment, change what's happening, or whatever's feeding the behavior to make sure that they, develop optimally. So that's also the nice thing that I enjoy about development, that the story can change based on how you intervene.
Because, having said that, it makes me wonder now, because if there was a situation where in South Africa, a lot of the schools did create a space for psychologists to interact with children, maybe like on a weekly basis or a daily basis. How much how better would the quality of like a lot of kids improve?
Exactly.
So drastic. And I wonder, because I'm sure we're probably not the first people to talk about
this. Yes, exactly. Specifically because which is something I'm also passionate about. Like the being a psychologist, being there can actually detect, especially in ed psych, specializing in having specific knowledge on those sort of like learning challenges or whatever. A psychologist present can actually start picking up quite early that this child, something's going on, we need to investigate further. But if it's just a teacher who has been studied for one thing and doesn't have specialized knowledge on how certain challenges manifest in the classroom, it's not easy for them to detect that, this child is actually dyslexic. He's struggling. You just think, this one is misbehaving. We know him from grade 1. He's being that child who always misbehaves. Kanti, the child is doing all they can to avoid reading in the classroom because they're dyslexic. It's a challenge for them. So imagine if a psychologist an ed psych was there to say, no man, how come this child behaves in maths, they are less inattentive and they're more attentive in maths, or they're more attentive in life orientation when they're doing, what was that thing called when we did like physical activity?
PE.
Yes, PE and stuff. Why is he so engaging in that? But those are the questions we ask. Why is he not like that in English? Specifically when you have to read and whatever, then we start noticing that there's something we need to investigate. So I think it would make a lot of difference in terms of early detection because we are trained to identify those things and see them quickly. But teachers don't always see that because, like I say, a child will behave a certain way. There's a lot of problems causing that behavior, but teachers can't see that. They just see a child who's misbehaving. They have to manage all these other kids, and it's hard to see the specifics.
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily something that they do on purpose.
No.
Unfortunately, it's just like when you're sitting in front of a class and you have to impart that knowledge of education, and this kid is doing that, and because you're being a parent and you're also trying to teach kids how to speak, how to write, how to count, how to do all these things. And then, unfortunately, it's like maybe they're not trained enough to identify those things, like you said, and having to deal with all of that, and then it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's not easy. Hence, even with us who have to just, in some cases, you work specifically with one client. Even that process in itself is difficult. Imagine if you have to deal with like 60 of those kids, especially when there are possible explanations for what they're going through. You see a child struggling to read in class, and you're like, I expect that you know that their name is Mang, their home language is Tswana. You're like, I expect them not to be able to read at this stage because it's not their first language. And you don't really, a teacher might not take it so hard and think there's more severe problems. But with us, we get to sit down with them, spend time with them, see that, oh no, it's not because of language, it's something else. So you can't expect teachers to be able to see that in that much detail. It's not easy.
Because you'd have to, I think in a lot of ways, you'd have to rethink our education system then, if that's the case, because now you take into consideration all these different nuances that kids have, like the different approaches to education and things like that. Because I remember teaching English when I was teaching English in China. I was like, there definitely were some kids who couldn't sit still for more than a minute. I'd watch him, like everybody else would be working, and then he'd work, and as soon as he's finished, he starts looking up. He stands up, he walks around, he goes, fucks with somebody else, he slaps him on the head or something, and you're like, dude, chill, man, But like, he's just he likes touching things, the kind of thing. So you just give him a toy, and then he just like kind of calms down, and then like everybody else gets jealous, but they don't really need the toy because they can obviously focus on themselves. But I wouldn't know how to deal with that. So it would have been great if you had like a psychologist that could like sit in there and be like, no, Wendy, this is what this kid needs. Do this for him, and he'll be perfect. I promise you. That would be so much more great.
But what was your impression of him? Like, what was your impression of that kid? Like,
I thought he was a very hands-on person. I don't want to like say like he wants to do woodwork and shit like that. No, I don't think it was that. It's just that like he was more tuned to doing physical activities. I think you know, because he could speak. Like there were times when like, you'd sit with him and like he'd be like, "Oh, what's this?" And, you know, it's a bat. What's that? It's a red bat. You know, that kind of a thing. You'd be like, "Hey Max, say this," and then he'd say it, and you're like, "Wow, you can speak English." It's not that you can't or anything. You don't have any disabilities, but you just maybe you have too much energy. Like maybe like you're operating at a high frequency. You're always like, "Ah, give me something else to do right now." You know, and like it's very obvious when somebody's not interested in something. So when you're teaching English, that's like it's very difficult to keep those kids engaged if you're not giving them a lot of activities to do, like games, or you're not singing a song, or you're not dancing, or you're not making a fool of yourself in front of them, because they love that. They want to laugh the whole time. So you could just be like playing around in front of them the whole time. You grab a ball and you act like it's about to spill out of your hand, and then you just lose it. They're like, I can't believe this guy. Look at him. You're just losing it, and you're like, yeah, it's good times. And then you're like, so nice. They're like, they give you all their attention because now you've stimulated them. Now they're happy. They're like, wow, this is a great place to be, and then it's easier for you to teach them.
Yeah.
So with Max, I thought he was a great kid. You know, he was just like, I think he's just naughty. Jay, he is naughty definitely, because he does smack other kids for no reason. Because this is one instance like, oh my gosh, bless Momo's heart. This is one kid. He was so cute and chubby. Big little round cheeks, and he was bald. He went bald. And then this kid just, like, I think we were sitting down watching a movie, and Max stood up and he walks over to him and he just puts his hand on his bald head, and he's just like if this was Momo's head, he'd just be there like, and then you're like, Max, no. And
what
then
are you
Momo,
doing?
Momo would be like, leave me alone, touch my head type of thing. And it was just hilarious to see, but as a teacher, I felt like an asshole because like, I shouldn't be laughing at things like that. But it's funny, maybe it's because I'm a guy, I don't know. But like, you know, eventually I was just like, you know what, stop, dude. He doesn't like that, just go sit down. Like, but that's it. Kids are just funny like that.
They're very interesting beings. I think like I once had to do like a school readiness assessment, and I had this kid.
Wait, school readiness assessment?
Yes.
Like if the kid is ready to go to school?
Yes.
They do that?
Yes. That's an actual thing.
We just got thrown in, bro. It's like, hey man, how old are you? Let's go.
So we did a school readiness assessment. So you kind of check if they have certain developmental, like they've made certain developmental milestones and have certain skills that they've acquired that will help them cope in grade 1. So even that would be a similar process. We'd see what they can do, what they can't do, then make recommendations of what like they would need to develop in order to cope in grade 1. So I had a time for school readiness, and he was, bless his, he was a great one. And I was so fascinated just to be like 6 years old and the level of perseverance, because they have to do a series of tasks as you're assessing them. And sometimes these tasks are like so difficult to do because obviously you want to test their ability. And he's there taking a deep breath like, okay,
so
let me think of another strategy. You don't even have a tantrum. And I was like, okay, no.
Wow.
Kids can be so like interesting and like fun to be around.
Yeah, they do throw tantrums, especially when they don't get it. And they feel like it's too hard. Because I think they understand like there's some things that are like, challenging.
Yes.
They can be like, okay, let me try again.
Yes.
But at some point, if they just don't get it, they don't get it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, when you're an adult, I think you're more prone to being full of shit. Like, I don't understand this, but you're just lazy or something like that.
Yeah.
But for kids are very honest.
Honest.
Wow. I had no idea they had those.
Yeah, we can do school readiness assessments for kids. So parents,
Jeez,
do that. You can actually check. The services, I think for me being in the training, like you realize how much of the services, you don't always bring like somebody to a psychologist because something's lacking, but seeing the value of bringing a child to a psychologist for the purpose of further development is also something for me that I'm starting to see the value of. Like, I can be fine with a child, I bring my own child and be like, I just want to see if they're ready for school so that I know which areas I have to develop. Because with that child, nothing was wrong per se. I mean, kids have strengths and weaknesses, but they can develop certain skills, you know. And that was a great experience for me because it wasn't me telling a parent that your child has this problem and that problem. It was like, your child is functioning quite well. You can do some of these activities that are very beneficial. You can play with them in this way. You can, enhance their arithmetic skills by, for example, whenever you're making them a cup of tea, you tell them this is 1 sugar, this is 2, fun stuff like that. And it wasn't necessarily that the child was there because there was some form of concern. So yeah, there are services you can use just to make sure that I just want to do it for the benefit of the development of my child.
Yeah.
And this and that way.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So it's some parents actually are invested in kids.
Exactly.
They can afford to be invested. As
They can. That's also the other thing. Being able to afford, in being invested in that way. Because even when we have kids that are problematic, like you find that there are some behavioral patterns from parents that are causing kids to behave the certain way. And it's not like parents are doing it intentionally or whatever the case may be. It's just not having knowledge of particular things, or they have circumstances that are not allowing them to invest in their kids as much as they want to. So you want to, and you can't be like, well, your child can't read because you don't make sure that you, for example, you don't make sure that you read bedtime stories to them. And you can't say things like that because you'd have to understand their circumstance. This person is a single mother, they're working at Pick n Pay, they knock off at 7, they have to, where are they going to get the time? The child has to be in bed by 8, maybe the sister or the brother has helped with homework. So it's difficult then. I can't say that mother's not invested in the child because they have a job and they're working and they want to make sure that they provide by all means necessary. But there are circumstances that don't allow them to go that extra mile, and then you work around that. What about the weekend? What about this? What about that? How we understand that investing. Maybe you want us to carry on?
You can carry on. It's okay. I'll work it out. It's not.
You edit, ne?
Yeah.
So maybe we can. I don't know. I really bounce off your questions. Or we could talk about the studying for it. Yeah, you actually good at that.
Okay.
You're actually good at that, hey?
Yeah.
That asking questions, because I'd be like, okay. Like I literally have written down that much structure. I don't know how you not.
Yeah, I would have done.
You just
that.
wing it, Nje.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to feel like an organic conversation. That's
it does. Yeah, so it really does.
I can make notes. I don't mind doing that, but it's like I wasn't exactly sure about what we're going to be able to talk about, what we're not going to talk about. Because hopefully you will come back at some point in the future, hopefully, so that at least I know. Oh, okay, no, I know you've been working on this and you've been working on that, and now, okay, I've got you back. Okay, great. I have so much questions about you. What about this that has happened recently? How's life going? What's going on with this? What's going on with that? And then it makes it a little bit like hopefully by then it'll just come to you and be like, you'll come in and you'll be like, hey, what's up, man?
Yeah.
Whatever.
I think what I'm learning now is what I think I need to think about and actually check what I cannot say. Because right now it's like, because I'm not sure, I just don't want to speak about that. Yeah. And then that would be nice because then we can go into more depth.
Okay, but can you tell me what the study is about at least right now? Do you think you can? Or what about like a working title? Like imagine, say don't shake your head just yet. I'm not finished asking the question. So I'm like, what if is it children related?
No, young adults.
Young adults. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. And then what's the issue you're investigating without like I mean if I were to tell you about say imagine I'm a lawyer and I say, well, I have a case concerning 2 adults, and you'd be like, oh, well what is the case about? Well, I'm like, well, divorce.
Yeah, see, it's just about they just want to explore the resilience of young adults who live in stressed communities. But because it's attached to somebody dramatic, I don't wanna. Okay, no, that's fine. My only worry.
But that's good because at least I have an idea of it now, and you haven't given anything away, pretty much, right? Mm-hmm. So that's okay. But what I was thinking is, I was about to read an article this morning. I just I just got so quiet. Like once, I think 9 a.m. was too early for me. It came too early for me.
I thought that's what you wanted to
It was time. It's a good time. It's a good time. But like, it was like I woke up and I was like, okay, because I was drinking last night. So I felt a little bit hungover and I was like, damn it. And I didn't get enough sleep. I think I fell asleep at 12, which is bad. I normally fall asleep at like 10 or 9. I sleep very early and then I wake up at 5 and I'm up. So like this morning I woke up at 5 and I went back to sleep and I woke up at 6 again. And then you texted me and you were like, yeah, the weather's great. And I'm like, oh. Yeah.
So serious.
And I just like pulled the sheets over again. I fell asleep. And I was like, okay, fine, let's do this. And then I started like getting ready and then there was a whole taxi issue. Oh my gosh, that
was very dramatic.
What was it? Oh, you're okay, dog. See, it's not so bad.
Very dramatically.
It's not so bad. Okay, great.
So what did you want to read about?
It was I looked up see, I can't remember, but like it's on that phone right now. And I'll send you the article as well. I'll put it up on like I'll put a link up where QR code so people can scan it in. But reading the abstract of the study, it was I think they said they did it over 10 years, and it was the first of its kind of study in South Africa where they were like looking at the trauma that children experience and how it affects them in the development of their life. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And essentially what they're doing, they're saying like, okay, I think the retention for the study was about at 97%. So some people they couldn't keep in touch with any longer. But what they're doing is they're gonna probably like profile or interview some people, and then they're gonna say, okay, cool. And then they talk about what they talk about, and then cool, those people go on with their life, and then I think they come back a year later and they talk to them again. A year later they come back and talk to them again. So like they were looking at the impact of trauma and development from an early age into adulthood. Because they know it does affect trauma does affect them, but they want to see like exactly how does it like affect these people. So I think they've been doing this like since, I don't know, like it says it's a 10-year long study. So they're literally looking at it in real time as it happens and as it develops, and they're just talking to these people the whole time making these assessments. I just wish I had remembered the name of the title. Because it looks so good. It looks so good. It looks so juicy.
That sounds hella dope.
That sounds really good. Yeah, I'm just bummed out I couldn't read it before because I just got so flustered. You have so many questions. Yeah, be like, what about this? What about that? But I mean, in trauma, if we were to talk about trauma, I think if something was to happen to you as a kid, does it often is it unusual that it manifests in your behavior patterns when you grow up? That like maybe I used to get bullied as a kid, or I used to get slapped around, whatever the case is, or like I was like threatened a lot as a kid, you know, and then like now I'm all grown up, and I may have like now I'm like exhibiting traits that like indicate that I don't know like I don't know how I can phrase this question, but because of that trauma, how can it shape me as an adult? Like what kind of things am I like more prone to do? So if I was getting like verbally abused and I was being bullied.
Okay. So what we need to understand is that children develop like in systems, right? There's a school setting, the home setting, whatever. And factors that influence a child's development sort of interact with like one another, right? So you'll find that the environment is influencing the child is influencing the environment, so on and so forth. So in terms of that interaction, it's unique to each child. So it's not like there are set traits that will be evident in adulthood if they can go through this, if same children go through the same experience.
Okay.
So it's highly likely that it will be different. It's likely that it will be the same. But you can expect that a child goes through a particular experience or trauma, and in adulthood, they also now exist in the same traumatic. So in other words, they can experience a certain trauma, a certain form of abuse, and then they end up maybe in romantic relationships that are like that as well. or it could be the opposite. So what I mean is that the outcome could be quite different in terms of how they're affected, but yes, it's possible that what has happened then manifests in adulthood because of things like if a child grew up in an abusive home where the method of relating is being physically violent to one another, the way they later interact becomes, the way they grow up interacting, it becomes normal. So in the relationships that they start being in, they start interacting in similar ways because they say, this is in these contexts, this is how we relate with people that we're in relationships with or whatever the case. And we understand that what kids do particularly is modeled behavior. So what they see, if you respond in particular ways that are aggressive or whatever, they think that's how they choose to respond because that's what they've ever witnessed. That's why even when we're doing like recommendations and we're doing interventions, we involve parents, we involve teachers because some of the kids take what they see from parents or teachers, even if it's not on purpose or whatever the case may be. So it does things that happen have an implication, but there are a lot of factors that can also change that trajectory because maybe kids have certain coping skills that are making it easier for them to overcome or make it possible for them rather to overcome whatever they're encountering.
So what would that coping skill look like? Would it be a sport? Would it be an extramural activity?
Yeah, sometimes it's just having certain skills, having a genetic disposition, a tendency to, sometimes it's biological, it's not something that a child has acquired, but they just are able to cope because of just who they are and the quality of their personality. Because some kids are maybe more prone to be more anxious than, So it just really depends on a number of things. Yes, it could be a skill. It could be people who come into that child's life at some other point at their stage of development and teach them new ways of behavior and, it could be higher intellectual skills. Not to say that kids who have low intellectual skills won't have a better outcome, but who have high intellect in the sense that they understand certain ways of problem solving, can see alternatives, can do this, can do that, and are not, vulnerable.
Amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. Because, this is going to sound a bit like, it doesn't matter anyway, but you don't associate genetics with how can I put this, with intellectual things. It's weird for me, cause I'm trying to think of it in a way that I can phrase it and then it doesn't sound weird or outlandish, but we know what the brain is, we know what the brain looks like, but we don't necessarily understand how the mind processes information. But there clearly is a way that it does process information and that it can be passed on to your children.
Yes.
And then in the same way that can also relay to, like you said, what's the phrase you used? Higher intellectual, low intellectual, what was that?
High intellectual functioning.
Yes. And so that can be passed down, right? That's crazy.
Yeah, it really can. And we always say biological factors when you refer to genetics and but they have a great implication. It's great even in terms of understanding depression as well. That's why sometimes people who are depressed don't necessarily they are more vulnerable to it because of certain genetic factors or hormonal certain levels of hormones and whatever the case may be. And it helps in creating that understanding because in some cases you get to understand why two people can go through the same thing, but this one was more vulnerable to get this type of disorder or whatever the case may be. So it plays a big role. Yeah.
That's amazing because you normally just associate genetics with physical appearances and physical abilities. So that for me is something new. It's wow.
Yeah, it has an implication for mental disorders, hormone levels.
That's amazing because it's the first time hearing about that, but like I think I might have like came across something similar to that when I was like listening to these lectures by like Dr. Robert Sapolsky. He's a behavioral psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
No, not behavioral psychologist. Sorry, a behavioral biologist at I think it's Stanford University, and he just talks about how like genetics influences behavior and how some people are more prone to being like psychopaths, sociopaths, and things like that because of their genetics. But it didn't make sense to me because in my head I'm seeing that like there's a gene, there's a maybe it's a psychotherapist. What is the word I'm trying to say? There's maybe a sociopath or psychopath like gene. Maybe it's like the psychopath gene in your body, and then it's traveling through your body, and it's like it gets activated. You're like,
no, man.
No, but like I know, but like eventually
you.
it's like there are like like maybe like you were saying like like maybe like because of like your genetic makeup, certain things or like more. I don't know how to say it.
I get what you're saying, yeah.
Maybe some certain hormones are produced in excess.
In excess, there we go.
Yeah, and then that causes, and maybe you're in a bad environment, and then that causes you
that
to have
interaction.
to form a certain like your psychology changes a person. Then you end up being more like sociopathic or psychopathic, or whatever the case is.
Yes, it's not amazing, like there's a certain gene. There's, like you say, things like certain hormones or neurotransmitters that are in excess, like things like dopamine. For people who experience like schizophrenia and stuff, that's what I studied, that they have an excess of that, and that's why it explains some of
they have an excess of dopamine? Of dopamine,
yeah.
Schizophrenic people?
Yes, I've heard some. I think it's dopamine.
Oh, okay.
And excess, you can check.
Yeah.
And they were like, it explains why they like experience things like hallucinations and delusions and stuff like that.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's see what I have to say.
Google.
Dopamine. Okay.
The schizo is characterized by abnormally. Oh, it says low.
Prefrontal dopamine activity causing deficit system. Symptoms. Let's see.
Saying leading to excess dopamine activity.
In mesolimbic dopamine neurons causing positive symptoms. Do you understand what that means? This looks like.
I'm trying to remember what positive symptoms are for schizophrenia. I think positive symptoms means a presence of certain symptoms. I think that refers to like your hallucinations, your delusions, your. Let me not lie, actually.
Yeah, because like reading this.
There's a hypothesis. I forgot that name. It's either Google maybe the dopamine hypothesis maybe.
Because like when I was reading that, like when I'm reading this, like I'm gonna try like just like caveman explanation. But it like when they say okay, let me just read the statement. The authors hypothesize that schizophrenia is characterized by abnormally low prefrontal dopamine activity, causing deficit symptoms, and then that leads to excessive dopamine activity in mesolimbic dopamine neurons. So I don't think you're wrong. Mm-hmm. It's like when you it like again I might be butchering this, but like it sounds like when you lack dopamine, like where not like a certain part of your brain's not creating enough, and then another body, like another part of it, like starts like making up for it in a way. It sounds maybe something like that. I'm not sure. Again.
I would definitely. I actually want to read this a bit more because I think if I recall, it said if there's an excess of that dopamine as opposed to low, like it says.
The deficit leads to excess in the mesolimbic dopamine neurons.
But excessive how? Okay, it actually makes me want to read up a bit more in a bit because I'd be lying if I say I'm sure. Okay. Google Scholar. This is Google.
Must I actually type in Google Scholar?
I mean, it'll send us. No, it's going to take us to articles most likely.
Yeah, that's what it does. That's what it's good for.
Yeah, but at least I know I can try.
Hypotheses of schizophrenia. Okay, I think this might be a good one. Let's see
what pops up.
Yeah. Oh, this is dopamine. Dopamine is that your happy hormone? What is that?
Yeah, it's like your reward. Is it a neurotransmitter? It's like I guess it's a neurotransmitter. I'd be lying if I say I remember. But it's like your reward. don't know.
Is it a hormone?
That's what I'm trying to understand if it's a hormone. I think it's a
It might
hormone.
be.
Dopamine. Is dopamine a hormone or a neurotransmitter? I actually don't even know the difference.
Dopamine is a type of neurotransmitter.
There we go.
Right? Your body makes it, and your nervous system uses it to send messages within the cells. That's why it's sometimes called a chemical.
What I know about it is that it's the neurotransmitter implicates in terms of like your reward system. It's in your reward pathway. So like if you, it's what implicated when we do drugs.
Yeah.
When we do But in drugs and all those things, people take drugs and that hormone's activated and people want to feel that again, you know.
Yeah.
And so for that hormone to be released, you again engage in behaviors that are, you know, you get what I mean.
That give you that feeling. So,
Exactly.
okay, I guess, I was going to ask them, what do endorphins do? But like, I don't want to bombard you with
I really am not fluent in the biological stuff. I'm not even going to lie. The only thing I think I've grasped over the years is serotonin is implicated in depression, dopamine in schizophrenia, I think a GABA neurotransmitter in anxiety. Yeah.
Okay. I think we got it, yeah. Schizophrenia. Decades ago, researchers believed that symptoms, and this is from WebMD. What is dopamine? Schizophrenia. Decades ago, researchers believed that symptoms stemmed from a hyperactive dopamine system. Now we know that some are due to too much of this chemical in certain parts of the brain. This includes hallucinations and delusions. A lack of it in other parts can cause different signs, such as lack of motivation and desire.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to remember in terms of like positive and negative symptoms.
Oh, yeah, you did say that.
Yeah, with some of them, it's like the presence of those symptoms, hallucinations, delusions. With negative symptoms, like an absence. We say it's negative because it's an absence of.
Yeah.
So they'll lack, I think, emotion or lack something, you know. So yeah. Nice to know that.
Dopamine. Yeah, but you were saying about like schizophrenic people, and then it causes too much dopamine. Yeah.
Then they'll like hallucinate or have delusions or whatever. And people with depression, like neurotransmitter serotonin, it regulates our mood. They'll have less of that happening. So that's why they'll be more prone to experience depressive symptoms and stuff. So it helps to at least understand those factors that contribute to, you know, like mental health, like mental illness, because then you get to see that it's not like, hence when people always put this on social media and stuff, like you can't just tell people to snap out of it. It's their biology, biology and how they feel, you know. Like I feel a certain way and I don't know what it is, or there's nothing in my immediate environment that's happening, but I just feel like down, or, you know. Yeah, so understanding it is great because it really makes you more sensitive to it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really a lot to take in. I mean, because, you know, we have such a, I think, I have such a, like, surface level understanding of, like, a lot of these conditions, such as, like, depression, and, like, anxiety, or schizophrenia. Schizophrenia was such a, I didn't know it was, like, because of that. I just thought somebody was just like that. You know, you don't think of it in terms of, like, chemicals, like, hormones and things like that, like, the body's chemistry, biological chemistry. You just think it's like, oh, somebody, there's just something wrong with them fundamentally, and like, you know, they're just schizophrenic, and then it's much deeper than that.
Like, did you think it was like inherent, or the way they grew up, or?
It's, how can I put it? It's almost like when you look at somebody. Okay, this is a bad example, but when you look at somebody, like, I like to think of, like, maybe homeless people. And then they always, maybe like it's this particular random homeless person, and then they're always ranting, and they're always angry, and then they always walk up to you for no reason, be like, you. And then he keeps walking off, and like, and you're like, what is that about? You get a bit confused. You think it's because, like, oh, maybe they did too many drugs and then their brain snapped. And then, but like, when you try to relate that to somebody who just grew up being schizophrenic, or whatever the case is, it's just mind-boggling because you can't make sense of it. It's
possible.
You know, there's no there's no surface logical sequence of events. Like you say, that's why he lost his mind, or that's why he did that way, as opposed to somebody who's been doing crystal meth, been doing all these different drugs, and eventually their brain can't take it no more, and whatever happens internally.
Okay.
So that's the difference with it.
Yeah, so it makes sense. So I think for you it was like attributing it to a particular experience. That, this might have happened and that's why they like this. And a part of that is also right, because people can be, like I said, they can be prone to certain, they can have a disposition to a vulnerability to be depressed, but they won't be depressed. With some people, they have a vulnerability, but again, because we have all these factors interacting, maybe that person experienced something in the environment, like losing a loved one, and then in combination with the fact that they're already vulnerable to it, then, experience depression. With other people have a vulnerability, but there's not an onset. Like the onset of it can be explained by something that has happened in that person's life. Because they were fine all along, and then it suddenly starts when they're 18, or it starts when they're 20, or whatever the case may be. So part of it makes sense that you can attribute the onset to something that has happened.
Or like triggers, right?
Exactly, what we call triggers.
Because I remember like smoking weed for me for the longest time. I used to enjoy smoking weed, it was fun. And then at some point it stopped being fun. You just get paranoid. And I don't understand why I'm so anxious or why I'm so paranoid. And then I think I found, like, let me just check again, but like, there's a whole debate about that. The thing about it is,
it's causing.
I think I think Mukhale said he's in middle school now, but he said it's like you have some underlying conditions, like you said, right? And these are things that can like make that. Then you have that trigger. So weed can exacerbate some conditions. So I think I'm not sure if he said it can like cause psychosis or let's see. But he did say like if you do smoke,
it can trigger it.
Yeah, it's not that like you smoke weed and then like, oh no, he's gone, like his Friday marbles. But there is okay. Yeah. People who use marijuana this is from the Recovery Village. I guess it's like a rehab center. And it says marijuana-induced psychosis remains unknown to most people. Psychosis is a mental health condition that occurs when someone begins to lose touch with reality and experiences visual and auditory hallucinations and delusions. Oh my god! Okay. This happened to me literally. So I was in third year. It was? Yeah, it was third year. I was in the Urban Nest.
Okay.
So I got high one time, and then I was sitting in my room, and then because like you'd hear a lot of police vans driving around.
Yes.
But this one particular night, I was baked out of my mind, and I was sitting there, and I'm like, oh, I'm so high right now. And then I'd hear the police sirens, and I'm like, okay, no, don't worry about it, Wendy. And then I think, people like walk around and they talk and they play in the hallways. So for me, like, you hear so many like different voices. In some weird way, I heard a particular voice, like it sounded like a security guard's voice. That's
okay.
Like, this is what you want to come. Control it once. Like, it's like, yeah, I want to get you guys to that. I'm like, oh, nah, that can't be it. And eventually it's quiet for a while. And then I hear the police van driving around and it stops. I'm like, what? Are you here to get me? I'm literally thinking, but just keep in mind, like, I switched off the lights and like, now I'm sitting down. I'm like, I'm just like thinking. I'm like, just thinking. I'm paranoid. And the noise starts in the hallways again. People start moving around and I'm like, they got a sniffer dog.
Oh my goodness.
I'm serious. I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm convinced this is real. This is happening. And I'm sitting in my room and I'm just like, okay, they got a sniffer dog. Okay, let me take a towel. I took a towel, I put it there. And I already did that, right? But I put another towel there and I closed down like the small little gap between the door and the floor. So I closed that over there and I'm sitting on the bed. And I'm like, the bed is uncomfortable. Let me lie on the floor. So I lie on the floor and I lock the bedroom door. And like literally people's feet are shuffling all over the carpet. And I'm thinking it's like, it's a dog sniffing door to door. And it never comes to my room. Right? So I'm like, wait.
What's happening?
Really? Like, yeah. And at that point, like, I lost my appetite. I couldn't want to eat anymore. I just went straight to sleep. So I was literally hallucinating an entire experience because I was too high. And I was like, this is crazy. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Because as soon as like that happened, I was just like, no, I can't smoke anymore. But it's crazy because like for the longest time I've always wanted to smoke. Like, you know, you always want to smoke. It's always something you want to do. You always want to smoke a J. And you're rolling, you're just like, oh, this looks so pretty. You know? And then it's just like, oh no, you can't do that now. It's just uncomfortable. So I turned to edibles. And like edibles are so much more better. And I think part of the thing was like because at that point they were still illegal. So like smoking a J, you'd smell like it. And it was just like, yeah, you'd just be paranoid like somebody's gonna know. But like once you eat a brownie, if you eat a brownie, how are they gonna know? Nobody knows. You just ate it, you know? You just look good, you look happy, you don't smell like anything suspicious, you're just chilling.
You just had a brownie, nothing
exactly.
incriminating.
You just had a brownie, nothing is incriminating about it. So,
a part of me believes, I haven't really researched like extensively on that because I've seen things that say, no, weed doesn't cause like a disorder, like specifically in cases where we talk about if a weed causes like a mental illness, like schizophrenia. I've seen things where they're like, no, that's not true. I've seen things where like they're not true, but that was like surface level reading. Haven't really dived deep into that. But for me, based on what I understand, I do think it can lead to like, you know, schizophrenia, because like you say, the impact of it creates those symptoms that you already see in schizophrenia. But obviously that has to be it seems to be in combination with other things as well, like I said, being vulnerable to it or whatever the case may be, because we get people who will smoke it and, you know, experience like a high and whatever, but they don't develop anything
no,
that's,
they don't,
you know,
I think what also happens is, I was reading this, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they have to say. Can marijuana use cause psychosis? Drugs and other substances are one of the primary triggers of psychotic symptoms. This type of condition is referred to as a drug or alcohol-related psychosis and occur with use of several substances, including stimulants or hallucinogenic drugs like LSD and alcohol. For some people, the use of a substance can trigger psychosis, but if someone with a substance use disorder attempts to quit using the substance abruptly, they can experience psychosis as well. Wow. Yeah, that's just crazy. Yeah, it's true. So yeah, that's just one of the things of like in terms of like schizophrenia and paranoia. I thought it was like true about marijuana, because like I remember there was somebody who tried to convince me like, no, weed causes like schizophrenia or whatever, and I'm like, I don't think that's true because, well, like I said, my friend told me, he's like, no, if you're more prone to it, whatever the case is, then it can trigger it, but it is never the cause of it. It like primarily, yeah. So.
Hence, we see people who use weed, but they are just fine.
Exactly.
So I think that's, you know.
But there's a lot of denial around it as well. People will be like, no, it doesn't. They're not related. It has nothing to do with that. That person just has some of the conditions. And I mean, like, dude, it's like, you know, it's in a lot of cases it can clearly be like the denominator. You know, like it's always there.
That's true. That's true.
So yeah. Okay. So what did you want to share with us about psychology?
I think the journey, the studying journey for it. I know that you know, when I started undergrad now, in humanities we had, I don't know if they still did that. I'm saying this before COVID. We would have like orientation. They would tell us, like, this lady once said, she was a qualified clinical psychologist, and she was like, if you're taking psychology and for this BA degree, as part of this BA degree, make sure you take you look at other careers as well. Like, take other modules that would allow you to get into other careers. And I always was like, why would I want to do that? Like, I want to do psychology.
Yeah.
What you learn as you progress through the career is that you do your BA for like 3 years, depending on the institution you're in, but most likely 3 years, and then from there you have to apply to get into masters. Mind you, you come from a humanities faculty, which is usually one of the largest, and then, you know, you have to now compete with these people who are also in final year with you. You have to get into honors. And I'm just speaking for the institution that I was in tax. You have to get into honors, and that is also based on marks. You know, you have to earn a certain average for you to get in. So it's just like, it's that process, that first step is not easy, because like what happens then if you didn't get selected for masters, and what you can do with psychology in terms of being an actual psychologist, you have to go through that process of getting into honors. You can't skip that and say, well, I'm going to get qualified. You're not going to, so that's something I think I want people to understand, that maybe it is wise then to be like just open-minded to how the career can go and what are other options that you can do in the meantime should you not get into honors. And then after that, which is honors usually it's masters.
Yeah.
Mind you, maybe you were like 3,200 in the final year of your undergrad. There's like 60 of you in your honors class, and they're taking like 6 in masters.
Gosh.
But there's different categories, right? We have research, we have clinical, we have counseling, we have, educational. So maybe they're taking like 14, 6, depending on the year and how the department works. So the numbers are reducing, with each like degree that you start applying for now. You're jumping into masters, they're taking less people. What happens there? I have my honors degree. I can't be a qualified psychologist without the master's degree. What do I do now in the meantime, making it work? So I think that's just what I wanted to emphasize, that it's really like a process.
Yeah.
And you have to be open-minded throughout this whole thing, that what happens if I don't get into this, and you can try again next year, and it eventually works out, but it's not easy.
Oh, so there are other avenues. Well, I mean, so if you wanted to say if I did my psychology 3 years BA, I did my honors, and then I'm trying to get into masters, and say for a particular program I can't get in, so I should be flexible enough to maybe do something else for that year until I can reapply for masters again.
Yeah, it's like, that's what my main point is, that just being open to just knowing that you might have to be flexible and do something else that's not completely related to psychology, and make it work for that year, I've heard instances where people say you have like a psychology degree, you are knowledgeable of a certain level of psychology. There's so many things you can do, but we don't know completely of those things. Like, you can do research, you can do, maybe you can get into academia or whatever the case may be. I'm also not very knowledgeable in that, because I just got into masters and I didn't have to, expose myself to other ways of using my honors degree and stuff like that. But yeah, just being flexible to the process, because it can take long. It's not just like a easy, and respecting timing and understanding
freeway. And sometimes a lot of curves and a lot of like obstacles in your road and in your journey. So,
Exactly.
I'm sure people really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's applicable to a lot of other fields of study as well. Yeah. Because I remember, not to take away from anything that you said, but when I finished matric, this was 2011. I wanted to get into LLB or BA, but there was no space. So I was applying with my matric results, which were terrible. So they weren't good enough. So I was put on the waiting list, right? So I mean, like, I get there, late registration for the next year, just to see if I got in for anything, and they're like, nah. It makes me I was like, oh man. I didn't feel bummed out, but I did, you feel kind of left up, because your friends might already be starting school already, and like, you're not going to be doing what you wanted to do either. So I was like, okay, let me take a gap year. So I was more than happy to take a gap year. But at that point in time, it was still feasible, because you could still work retail,
Exactly.
So circumstances are much more different right now, There's not a lot of work to go around. So it's only later that year, around like July or April, then I reapplied for my degree program, and I got preference because I had my matric certificate, my marks were decent enough to get into university. So it does. I think it does like ring true to what you said. Like it's just because you don't get on the first try.
It doesn't mean I think we get very like narrow-minded about like, this is the journey that it's going to be as long as I get good marks. I think it's also something I'm learning with my own career, even in masters, that there are things that are just not up to me. Like whether I was appealing to the panel who chose me for masters, it's not something I can control. I did my part in terms of doing my best and doing what I could do in honors, but in terms of them feeling that I'm ready to be in the program, that was not something that I can control. So had it been that I hadn't gotten in, it was probably going to be very difficult. And I don't know for people who who've experienced that.
Yeah.
But just just for people who want to apply for it, they need to know that that's what they expect, and we have to do internships for that before we get registered and qualify. So it's a long process. Like, set aside a good 7
Oh
years.
my gosh, it might take longer than expected.
It might take it, and with it taking longer than expected sometimes, So, but if you love it, if you love the career, it's not going to be easy, but
you will
it's
do
worth
the grinding. You will have to do the
worth
grinding.
it.
Oh my gosh, it must be so much fun. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's a good note to leave it on.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I actually enjoyed this so much.
How was it?
Initially, I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, you were so scared at first.
I was.
But I couldn't tell. I couldn't even tell.
That's amazing. Imagine as a fully qualified psychologist and you can't tell. There we go.
Yeah, you're just gonna come through and you be like, the gowns, the belts and everything. We're like, what's happening? One day, slap you with one of them. Like, no, not the master's belt. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
oh my
definitely.
gosh, I'm so excited for you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for this podcast. You're doing it so naturally, and like I was telling you earlier that I would have had set questions and but to you this comes with ease, and that's a good thing. It means I think you're in a good place as long as you're enjoying it. Then
Thank you.